An old man, lonely, sometimes forgetful. No one knew who he was, but the diner owner always greeted him with a smile, placing in front of him, some mornings, a plate of eggs, other days just a cup of coffee, and always a seat by the window. Until one day, he stopped coming. A week later, 4 military tanks mysteriously appeared outside the small diner, and what they brought with them moved everyone to silence. Welcome to NT, where everyday kindness becomes unforgettable. Let's begin this journey together. The eastern sky was just starting to glow, the sun still hiding behind the gray outlines of the hospital buildings, when the lights of Mabel's morning light flickered on. Her little diner sat quietly on the corner, just across from the city's general hospital, a place where ambulances came and went around the clock, and where countless lives began or ended. In a neighborhood full of noise and hurry, Mabel Dawson's diner was an unnoticed pocket of peace, humble, small, and warm, in a way the rest of the city had long forgotten. Mabel was 32 years old, with gentle features, brown hair usually tied up in a neat ponytail, and a soft smile that felt like sunrise. She wasn't wealthy, wasn't flashy, but what people remembered most about her was that she was kind for no particular reason. Whether it was an overnight nurse, a tired doctor, or a stranger needing nothing more than a glass of water, Mabel treated everyone like family. And for the past 5 months, every morning at exactly 6:15, one particular customer walked through her door. Walter Granger, 78 years old. Tall but thin, slightly hunched, with hair as white as ash, and always wearing the same worn-out olive green military jacket, faded Marine Corps insignia still stitched onto the chest. People didn't really notice him for how he looked. They noticed him for his eyes. Eyes that seemed lost, yet filled with fragments of a past no one else remembered, except him. They met on a chilly fall morning. Mabel had just finished wiping down the counter when she saw him standing outside the window, hands trembling as he fumbled through his coat pockets. One hand clutched his military cap, the other pulled out a crumpled bill, then tucked it back in with a shake of his head like he didn't quite believe it would be enough to pay for anything. She opened the door and said gently, "Why don't you come in for a cup of coffee, sir? It's cold this morning." He looked up, eyes clouded but hopeful. "Linda? Is that you?" he asked. Linda? Maybe a nurse? Maybe a wife? Maybe someone from decades ago, stitched into the patchwork of his fading memory. Mabel didn't correct him, she just smiled. "My name's Mabel, but you can call me whatever you need to, as long as you come sit down." That morning's breakfast, 2 slices of toast and a couple of over-easy eggs, was a gift Mabel allowed herself to give. He ate slowly, politely, and didn't say much. Before leaving, he placed a shaky hand on the counter and said, "I'll come back tomorrow to pay you." I've never begged from anyone, and he did come back. The next morning, and the morning after that. Sometimes he remembered her name. Sometimes he sat at the exact same table and thanked her like clockwork. Other days he mistook her for someone else, or stood confused in front of the door, unsure why he was even there. No one really knew where Mr. Walter lived. Some said he rented a room nearby. Others claimed he was a long-term patient the hospital allowed to take morning walks. But to Mabel, he was not someone to pity. He was someone who had once stood in the middle of war, once led men into battle, once risked everything to make it home with a heart still beating. But time and trauma had carved deep grooves into his memory, leaving only scattered pieces, blurred lines between past and present. Some days, he'd enter the diner like a soldier reporting for duty. Boots shined, shoulders squared, cap perfectly aligned. He'd salute Mabel like a commanding officer and sit down quietly, as if awaiting orders. Other mornings, she'd find him wandering behind the diner, mumbling things like, "Secure the east perimeter, check coordinates." Or suddenly shouting, "You've camouflaged wrong, you're going to get killed." Patrons would sigh, a few rolled their eyes, one med student whispered to a friend, "Another old vet with dementia, this city's full of them." But Mabel didn't see a senile old man. she saw a soldier, trapped between two timelines, clinging to loyalty and memory like life rafts. He once told her about a young private named Ramirez, who always saved the last piece of bread for his little sister back home. Another time he murmured, "Mortars don't care who you are, but orders always come late," then fell silent, as if he'd already said too much. His stories were fractured, repeated, out of order, no beginning, no end, but Mabel listened to them as if each one was brand new. Sometimes he'd look her straight in the eyes and ask, "Linda, are you still waiting for me to come home?" And she would freeze. She didn't know who Linda was, but in that moment she could see a man who no longer knew where war ended and peace began. A man holding on to whatever scraps of memory he had left, and above all, a man who longed, desperately, to be remembered. Walter reminded her of her grandfather, the one who used to walk her to school, who held her close on nights her parents argued, who poured her tea and told her she was safe. He had passed when she was only 12, but that feeling of comfort never left. Every time Mr. Walter sat at that table by the window, quiet and still, Mabel felt like she was repaying some old debt of childhood safety. Some regulars took notice, not all of them kindly. Harriet, a middle-aged nurse who often stopped in after overnight shifts, once asked, "That old guy, does he actually pay for breakfast?" "He's a veteran," Mabel replied, "sometimes forgetful, but he always tries to come back." "Well, if you keep giving handouts like that, someone's going to take advantage." Another young med student smirked when he saw Walter shuffle through the door. "Another lost patient wandering in? This city's crawling with him." Mabel said nothing. To her, Mr. Walter wasn't just some old broken man. He was someone who had sacrificed part of his mind so others could live their lives whole. And because of that, every morning without fail, Mabel made sure there was a hot breakfast, a black coffee, and a window seat, waiting just for him. That Monday morning began like any other. Mabel opened the diner at 5:30 sharp. She brewed the first pot of coffee, straightened the sugar jars and napkin holders, and pulled out the chair by the window, the one where Mr. Walter always sat. A breeze of crisp morning air drifted in as she cracked open the window, and as she did every day, she poured a cup of black coffee and set it on the old ceramic saucer. The only one Mr. Walter had once said reminded him of back in Da Nang. 6:15, no sign of him. Mabel didn't panic. Maybe he was just running late. Maybe he had early lab work at the hospital across the street. She went on serving her first customers. A doctor with tired eyes, the same paper delivery guy, a couple of folks picking up pastries to go. 6:30, the chair stayed empty. 6:45, a subtle unease crept in. She stepped outside onto the sidewalk, scanning the street that led from the hospital. No Walter, just a security guard sipping coffee from a thermos inside the booth, and a few patients slowly walking in hospital gowns fluttering in the wind. 7:00, Mabel went back inside, busied herself clearing another table, but her eyes kept drifting toward the window seat, still empty. That afternoon, when she closed the diner, she packed up the untouched breakfast in a takeout box, labeled it in neat handwriting, "Mr. Walter, keep cold." In her heart, she didn't feel alarmed, at least not yet. Maybe he just wasn't feeling well. One missed day wasn't unusual. But then came Tuesday, then Wednesday, then Thursday, still no sign, and Mabel found herself doing something she hadn't realized until that moment. Waiting for the familiar shuffle of boots, waiting for that slow nod or the confused glance, waiting for a man who often forgot why he came but never forgot how to return. The diner filled up as usual each morning, lively, busy, buzzing, but to Mabel something was missing. The room had gained people, but lost presence. Still, she brewed his coffee. Still, she set his plate. Still, she left the window seat untouched. One morning, as she carried out a plate of toast, Harriet, the nurse who never quite understood, glanced at the empty table, then at Mabel. "He's probably not coming back, hon," she said flatly. "You don't have to keep saving that spot, you know." Mabel didn't answer. She set the plate down at the empty table, just as carefully as if someone were sitting there. That Friday night, she dreamed of Walter. He was standing in the middle of the diner, silent, not smiling, not speaking. Just standing there, hands by his side. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away, his back hunched, disappearing into the dim light near the kitchen door. Saturday morning, Mabel opened the diner just like always. But something in the air felt different, heavy, still, like the pause right before something changes. And then, at 9:17 a.m. it happened. A sound rumbled from down the street, not the whine of a scooter, not the squeal of a city bus. It was deep, low, heavy, a kind of growl that seemed to come from the ground itself. Mabel set down the coffee cup she was pouring. Slowly she walked toward the front window, her eyes widened, and her heart skipped a beat. 4 military tanks, painted in muted olive green, were moving steadily down the street, heading straight toward her diner. The 4 olive green tanks lined up in perfect formation in front of the little diner, blocking off the quiet street that, on any other Saturday morning, would have been calm and unremarkable. People on the sidewalk slowed their steps. Some stopped completely, staring in silence. A few hospital staff from across the street pressed their faces to the windows. No one understood what was happening. The city was used to sirens and noise, to hustle and honking horns, but not this. This was different. Mabel stood frozen behind the glass door, one hand gripping the edge of her apron. Her heart was pounding, each beat loud and insistent in her chest. The tank doors opened. One by one, soldiers stepped down. Uniforms crisp, posture sharp, boots polished. They didn't shout, they didn't stomp. They moved with quiet purpose, and that silence spoke louder than any sound ever could. Leading them was a middle-aged colonel, his face weathered by sun and time. His formal dress uniform was lined with rows of medals, each earned, not given, and on his chest, the same insignia Mabel had seen so many times, on Mr. Walter's jacket. The diner's bell jingled softly as the door opened. No one said a word. The customers inside, mid-bite or mid-sip, stood up. Chairs scraped quietly. The entire room held its breath. The colonel stepped forward, voice low but clear. "Excuse me? Are you Mabel Dawson?" Mabel nodded, her eyes locked on his. "We're here on behalf of Staff Sergeant Walter Granger, per his final request." The room went completely still. "He passed 3 days ago, at the hospital across the street. But before he died, he left us a message asking us, the soldiers he trained, the ones who called him sir and teacher, to come find you and thank you." Mabel's breath hitched. Her hand reached for the edge of the counter, needing something to hold on to. The colonel continued, his voice catching for the briefest moment before regaining its composure. He said that in his final days there was only one place where he still felt like a person. Not a patient, not a burden, just a man. And that place was here. With the woman who didn't ask questions, didn't turn away. The woman who simply put a hot breakfast in front of him, a cup of coffee, and gave him a place to sit, like he still mattered. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Edges slightly bent, the wax seal still unbroken. "This letter," he wrote on the last day he was lucid, "and he asked that we place it directly into your hands." The colonel took a deep breath. His eyes held something a soldier rarely showed in public, feeling. You may not know this, but near the end, he barely recognized anyone. Doctors said it was late-stage trauma, induced cognitive decline, long-term effects from the war. Most of the time, he lived somewhere between now and then. He called doctors sergeants, thought his hospital bed was a field tent, spent whole days staring at the ceiling like it was the sky in a war zone. Mabel bit her lip. She had seen it too, in his eyes, even in her diner. That drifting, that quiet chaos no one else could name. The colonel's voice dropped, softer now, like he was sharing a sacred truth. But something strange would happen. On the rare days his mind cleared, just for a moment, he would say your name. Mabel looked up, startled. Always Mabel? The girl at the diner? He met her gaze directly. He said, "She's not afraid of me. She doesn't ask who I am. She doesn't leave when I repeat myself. She just feeds me, even when I can't remember if I've already eaten. And in those moments, I know I'm not in the past. I know I'm still here." The room fell into a deeper silence, a silence that didn't feel empty, but full. Even the soft hiss of the coffee machine stopped, as if the diner itself was listening. The colonel bowed his head. To us, Walter was a teacher, a leader, a symbol of honor. But to you, he was a man. You saw him when the rest of the world forgot how. And that peace you gave him, even metals and medicine couldn't do that. Mabel lifted her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob rising in her throat. Her cheeks were wet, and she didn't even remember when the tears had started. The envelope in her hands felt warm, like he was still there, fingers brushing hers one last time. Like he was saying, "I still remember you," on the days I could remember anything at all. Then the colonel stood tall, and with practiced grace, he raised his right hand in a formal military salute. Behind him, every soldier, both inside the diner and standing at attention near the tanks, followed suit. Not a word, not a movement, just the quiet thunder of respect filling the room. And Mabel, trembling, stood at the center of it all. Her apron stained with flour, her hair slightly undone, holding the final thank you of a man the world had nearly forgotten, but she never did. Mabel clutched the envelope like it was the last piece of Mr. Walter she could still hold. Everything around her seemed to slow. The soft morning breeze slipped in through the slightly open window, but it couldn't drown out the sound of her heart pounding in her chest. She carefully broke the seal. The edges of the paper trembled beneath her fingers, as if Walter were writing it at that very moment, not from a cold hospital bed, but from the corner booth in her diner, bathed in warm sunlight, where he used to sip his coffee in silence. The letter was folded neatly in half. The handwriting was bold, slightly slanted, and perfectly aligned. The script of a man who'd once written field reports in the middle of war zones no one would survive. To Miss Mabel Dawson. I don't know if I'm clear-headed enough to finish this letter, but if you're reading it, then I probably didn't get the chance to say thank you. You don't know who I am, and truthfully, there were many days I didn't know either. But each morning, in the fog of my fractured memory, I saw you. You weren't afraid of me. You didn't look at me like I was broken. You just set down a cup of coffee, a plate of eggs, and gave a quiet nod, like I was still someone who mattered. I once led young men into battles we were never taught how to return from. I survived, but a piece of my mind stayed there. They called me a patient, but you looked at me like a person. You didn't just give me breakfast. You gave me back a part of myself I'd long since lost. You didn't ask why I couldn't remember. You didn't demand I explain. And because of that, I knew I was still a soldier, still a man, no matter what my brain forgot. Thank you for not walking away when the world did. Thank you for giving me a place to sit, not just as someone who survived, but as someone still living. I've asked the young men I trained, my boys, to deliver this to you. I trust they will. With them, honor never dies. Walter Granger. When Mabel looked up, her eyes were blurred with tears. The letter trembled in her hands, but she couldn't speak. She didn't have to. The soldiers around her already understood. Without a word, the colonel turned toward the rest of the diner. He gave a small nod, and instantly every customer in the room, nurses, doctors, students, delivery workers, people who had once looked away or said nothing, rose quietly to their feet. No one spoke, only the kind of silence that carries meaning, not absence. Then, almost by instinct, Each person gave a gentle nod toward Mabel, a quiet bow of respect. For a woman who had offered something that war, time, and the world had long since taken from a man, his dignity. Outside, the four tanks remained motionless under the soft morning sun, symbols of power, now standing guard for a single, silent act of kindness, as if the military itself was honoring the woman who had treated a forgotten veteran like a human being. Mabel stood in the center of it all. No speech, no spotlight, just a waitress in a flour-dusted apron who had given a soldier his final place to belong. A week after that morning, Mabel's morning light returned to its usual rhythm. The scent of fresh coffee still filled the air by 5:30 a.m. Mabel still tied her hair up in the same neat bun, wiped down the counter, warmed up the griddle, and welcomed the first guests with her gentle smile. But for anyone who had been there that day, the diner was no longer quite the same. By the window, Mr. Walter's table remained untouched. No one sat there. No one was allowed to. Every morning, Mabel still placed a black coffee on the table, a plate of toast, and over-easy eggs, just the way he liked them, right on time, as if he might walk through the door any minute and take his seat again. Behind his chair, a small glass case had been mounted to the wall. Inside it, Walter's old Marine Corps cap, edges frayed just like the day he first carried it into the diner, and his original handwritten letter, framed carefully beneath a small engraved plaque that read, "For the one who gave a soldier back his dignity with a cup of coffee and a quiet act of kindness." New customers often paused at the display, their eyes lingering. "Who was he?" they'd ask, and Mabel would smile softly. "A guest of honor," she'd say. After the military visit, word spread quickly through the neighborhood. The local newspaper ran a story titled, "A Diner Owner, a Veteran, and the Breakfast That Brought a Man Back to Life." A week later, Mabel received a letter from a veterans organization. They asked permission to name a care program after Walter, using the story as a symbol of hope. She agreed, but made one thing clear. "This story isn't about me," she said. "It's about a man the world had forgotten until someone listened to him eat breakfast." Not long after, a group of high school students visited the diner. Their teacher had shared Mabel and Walter's story as a lesson in unconditional kindness. One boy, with curly hair and wide, curious eyes, looked up at the framed letter and asked, "Ms. Mabel, can we sit at that table tomorrow to tell stories about him?" Mabel paused, then nodded. "You can," she said. "Just be sure to leave room for his coffee." From that day forward, Walter's table was never lonely again. Sometimes older veterans would come by, sit in silence, and leave a single coin in front of the case. Once, a young soldier left a handwritten note. Others simply stood, saluted, and walked out without saying a word. Kindness like that doesn't shout, it moves like morning light, soft, steady, and warm enough to thaw parts of the world long thought frozen. Mabel never believed what she did was anything extraordinary, but in the hearts of soldiers, the forgotten, and even the young who had never known war, she had given something far more powerful than praise or medals, a quiet reminder that they were still human and still worth remembering. And every morning, as sunlight filtered through the window and spilled across the familiar wooden table, Mabel would gently set down the coffee cup and whisper, "Good morning, Mr. Walter. It's a beautiful day today." The story of Mabel and Mr. Walter isn't extraordinary because out there are countless people like Walter. Older men and women caught between the present and the past, carrying the invisible weight of war on their shoulders, living quietly at the edges of society with wounds no one sees. And there are just as many Mabels, ordinary people who choose to be kind, even when no one is watching, even when no one asks them to. So the question is, when you see someone on the street, lost, confused, mumbling things no one understands, what will you do? Will you walk away like most do? Or will you stop, offer a glance that doesn't judge, a moment of patience, or maybe even the gift of being seen? Sometimes, how we treat the forgotten is the clearest reflection of our humanity. What about you? In a world that grows more indifferent by the day, can we still offer one of the simplest yet most powerful things of all? Respect. Share your thoughts below. And if you believe that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, leave a comment that includes the word respect. And if stories like this make you pause, if they warm your heart just a little, follow Honest Moments, where we tell the simple, beautiful truths that often go unnoticed in a busy world.